Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the Central Brookhaven Democratic Club's April meeting. We're actually going to have two meetings this month. We have one that we're going to announce on Monday that's going to be coming up right at the last Friday of the month. But I'm excited for our program tonight. I also want to mention though that, as we know, today is Passover. There are many religious folks who observe, also people observing Good Friday. So many people wanted to be on this call who just simply couldn't because of family and religious obligations. So we want to respect them, which is why we're recording this event so that people can watch on Google Drive, which is where the video will be made available to, and they'll be able to, see the interview tonight and the questions. Some of the folks, had expressed that they wanted certain questions asked that we'll get to. Tonight's guest is Diana Reyna, who's running for Lieutenant Governor. I'll introduce her shortly. And we'll get to our main program. You will get an opportunity to ask questions for at least 15-20 minutes after the interview is done. And we're going to be done before 8:30 tonight, as the candidate has a prior engagement as well to make. There's going to be plenty of time to get everything out. I just want to acknowledge some folks on the call. We have candidates Farzine Baum, who's running for the New York 2nd Senatorial District. And do we have other candidates on? Actually, no. So that it's Farzine Baum. Good luck to him. We're going to be hearing a lot from Farzine coming up, in the months to come. So I want to get right into our program. So I'm going to. All right. Here's Diana. I'm going to ask Diana to unmute herself. Okay. Okay. Hey, Diana, how are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me, Will.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're still getting used to this whole operating in a silo on Zoom. We're going to start doing in person soon, but I still love being able to connect with someone where are you right now? Are you in the city at the moment, or where are you?
Yes, in Brooklyn.
So this might not have happened if not for Zoom. So, you take the good with the bad, right?
Absolutely. Avoiding traffic at all costs. It helps.
Yes. See, I was prepared to do this on the train if there was because if you're a commuter like I am, you got to be prepared to whip out your phone and do your Zoom interview or whatever right there.
Wherever you are.
Exactly. So thanks so much for joining. I want to give you an opportunity. First, I'm going to introduce you. You are Diana Reyna. You are running for Lieutenant Governor of New York in a primary right now against a couple of other folks. We will get to that. Previously, you started your career as a New York City councilwoman. If I have this right, you were the first Dominican American woman elected to public office in New York State.
Yes.
And then you became the deputy Brooklyn Borough president as well.
That's correct.
Excellent. Well, Diana, thank you so much for joining us. I want to give you a couple of minutes. Tell us, why you're running and a little bit about your campaign, and then we'll get into our convo.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. Congratulations to the Central Brookhaven Democratic Club for its founding in 2020. What an optimal time to be able to connect with one another. I know that these past 2 years have been a strain on families, friends, neighbors, and the human contact of a new society is what we're shaping here. So thank you for your service to one another and your commitment to your community. As Will has mentioned, my name is Diana Reyna. I started in politics in 1995. I was a young senior in college, looking for what would be opportunities to serve my community, and landed what was an internship with my local assembly member who represented in those times Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and Bushwick. His name is Assemblyman Vito Lopez. And the opportunity to be able to serve that summer changed my life. I was a nursing major at Pace University in Pleasantville, New York. And lo and behold, had seen what politics can do to impact people's lives and community. I changed my major that summer, going back to school, finished a year later, and dedicated myself to securing a full-time employment opportunity at the Assemblyman's office. I then became his chief of staff and was able to work on very important issues throughout our district, I grew up in Los Ures, Williamsburg. It's not the Williamsburg you know of today. It's the Williamsburg during the 70s and 80s, up until 1991. These are communities that at the time were in despair. Were managing what was a landlord abandonment of buildings, homes, where tenants had to organize to rebuild, renovate, provide resources for themselves. In particular, my family occupied what would be a 3-family home at the time. And we were not the landlord. The landlord had sold their home, and we happened to find ourselves in a displacement situation, going to housing court. I was around 8, 9 years old, having to translate for my mother in court, housing court. Those were times when we were dealing with shut off of electricity, no oil in the tanks, where we had to be able to direct our own personal funds to be able to have heat and hot water, because at times we didn't have. And so that to me was probably unbeknownst to me, what really cemented the need for providing myself the opportunity to serve my community in a higher capacity. These issues continue to remain. I want to just share, my mom is a woman that came to this country in 1965. She was a single woman in her 20s, happened to travel from Puerto Rico as a nanny for an English family, who then, after a year, went back to Dominican Republic to say her goodbyes. She secured a visa to come and stay with a good friend of hers who embraced her, gave her a leg up by staying with her until she was able to get on her own 2 feet. She was a talented seamstress in the factories of Williamsburg, Bushwick, Soho, what you consider Soho today. She in the garment district, but soon those days were over and she had to reinvent herself. She found herself becoming a home health aide, taking care of seniors for the latter of her life. She retired at 79, and thank God she's 85 today, and we are loving the opportunity to be able to care for her. I'm married for 20 years to a New York City Police Department lieutenant, raising 2 young teenage boys, 14 and 16. And I've been able to dedicate myself to what was a small business for the last 4 years, consulting. After I had taken a break, 22 years in government can really take a toll on you mentally, physically, and spiritually. And so I had lost my father 5 years ago, and I saw myself in a very difficult emotional state that I needed to make sure that I rebuilt myself. Today, I am re-entering politics. Perhaps it's crazy talk, but I don't like the direction of our state, our city. We're seeing what would be the progress that we've built for the last 20, 30 years disintegrate in the last few years. I don't want my children to have the childhood that I had, despair all around. I dedicated 2 decades of my life to raise them amongst what is a community that would be safe, where they would be able to travel to school. They go to Manhattan high schools. It's not a time where they can hang out with their friends, and it pains me to be able to say that about our city and our state. So I just wanted to give you a sense of who I am as a person, my values, my work ethic. I have, integrity, and it's hard to find in a state that's considered by the Washington Post the most corrupt.
Well, that's something I wanted to get to with you. Is that's no secret about New York, and I'm glad that you said that you needed a break for a while from public service, because I hear that a lot. The things that you experience, especially if you're working up in Albany, which I did for a short time, and many people I know have, and the things you experience. But even if you're working in New York City politics, it's a rough, it's a rough field. It really is. And we know that just to give an example. So one of the things that happened that we didn't know, well, at least I didn't know was going to happen before, we agreed to do the call, was the news surrounding our, I guess now former Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin, who was arrested and charged with conspiring to direct $50,000 in state funds to a developer's charity in return for bundling thousands in illegal contributions, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure that was the storyline in The Wire season 3. Like, I'm reading that, I'm like, wait, this actually happened in Baltimore, I think. And I mean, that's a common thing, unfortunately, in many areas in politics. But what got me was that as an observer of what goes on, and many of my friends, it's like, I'm not even shocked, and it's like, you think to yourself, why is a lieutenant governor resigning in the middle of an election where he apparently is still on the ballot? Why does it feel like a routine occurrence months after a governor resigned, who, when he started his term, he was replacing Patterson, who also had ethical issues, who replaced Spitzer, who was indicted, who, during his term, you have, 3 Senate majority leaders from different parties between Dean Skillos and Malcolm Smith and Joe Bruno and Sheldon Silver. I mean, the names go on and on. We saw in Nassau County, even though this is not state politics, but Ed Mangano just sentenced. It's endless. Right. So I guess the question I have for you, point blank, is why is Albany such a cesspool? Why does it feel like it's getting worse? And structurally, even if you go and you're a different, which we assume you to be, what can be done structurally to change this from an ethical standpoint? What can be done to stop the embarrassment of New York being like this epicenter of corruption from both parties in many ways?
That's a tough situation to even hear you list what would be a litany of names, right, throughout all these years, and it just doesn't stop and it doesn't get better. You're absolutely right. We vote with our there's a distinct honor in the right to vote, right? And we vote our leaders in as much as we can vote them out. And this speaks volumes as to what is perhaps the vetting process that the governor's office failed to thoroughly investigate. There were already rumors of investigation prior to. And why was not then that taken more serious? These are issues that were happening in plain sight when he was in the Senate, as far as Brian Benjamin was concerned. My heart goes out to his family. He has 2 kids. He just got married. This is not the life that any family would want to live through right now at this moment. But we know that we have to inspect what we expect out of government. And that doesn't happen by sitting idle to the sidelines and seeing from afar what's happening. Albany is very distant from its constituency. We cannot allow for elected officials to go away to Albany, conduct their business 4 or 5 days out of the week, and we don't hear of what's happening. And there's less and less engagement with the constituency. And the pandemic has truly proven what is a failure of government, right? To be able to have what is the capacity under emergency preparedness to be ready for the next disaster. We have to have what is a governor and a lieutenant governor that is experienced, that has integrity, that understands what's at stake here, so that we don't repeat history. I was part of the ethics committee in the council, and we had several cases, and you would never know. The telltale signs are not necessarily in the open, but all it takes is one individual to be able to call in. There's, JCO, which is the system that oversees at the state level conflicts of interest. You have COIB, and I'm throwing these acronyms around, but they mean something. These are the agencies that oversee legislators, government officials, and where there's corruption at the top level, you better be sure there's going to be corruption in between. Yeah. And that's where it becomes a cesspool. And so this is not just about our elected officials. This is about making sure that we're getting to the root of the problem.
Right, because you're absolutely right about that. It happens at levels that we don't see. We read in the news about the people who are elected, but
Mhm,
that's what's happening at the top. That's the message that's being sent all the way down that this is okay.
mhm,
And you're
mhm.
absolutely right. We have a whole bunch of things, people have been messaging me all day about ask this. So we have a lot of hot button things that we need to get to. Before I get to any of that, I always want to start out with, you told a personal side of, how you got involved. I also want to know, I ask every candidate this, when it comes to your platform, what do you feel, if there's any piece of your platform at all that you want to talk about, or a couple of pieces that really set you apart from the other options on the ballot? Again, we mentioned that as of right now, Brian Benjamin, the former lieutenant governor, is still on the ballot. We'll see. There's a couple of ways that he could be off the ballot, but that remains to be seen. For now, you also have Jumaane Williams, running mate, who is, on the ballot as well. What sets you apart? And I apologize, I am simply forgetting her name. I was just not been paying attention to.
Well, I'm not going to convey the name either.
Well, of course, no, and that's our role. And we'll reach out to see if she'd like to come on, or like Jumaane. We reach out to every candidate, and that's what it's about. But it's and that's my fault as a host to not remember the name right off the bat. But you have all these options, and I feel like too often candidates do not directly demarcate like what's different about their platform than the others. What's different about you, and what do you feel about your platform really sets you apart, that you say this is my piece of the platform, this is what I bring to the table?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I want to just share, public safety is above all the number one issue, not because it's our issue alone, but because across the state, as we engage on teletown hall meetings, and when we go to meet and greet in their communities, as far as the specific community of the week, people are scared. People feel terrorized. People feel unsafe. They cannot travel to go to work. They cannot travel to go to school. You can't engage in the park. You cannot go to the library. People are getting shot. They're innocent bystanders. This is just domestic terrorism, right? Like when we have out of control crime, it has to get addressed. I don't support what is defunding the police. I don't believe that that is an answer. And we see what is happening. There is an opportunity here to be able to fix bail reform. And I'm not talking about doing without the reform. There was a need for reform, but now we have to go back and figure out what do we need to address that's not necessarily included, that needed to be included. You have what is this oversight of judges that has to take place. We have to hold our chief administrative judge who oversees the caseload and judges' performances on the bench. And we have to make sure that there is not an implicit bias. So that requires cultural competency training. Do we know for a fact that that's being requested, that that's being implemented amongst judges, amongst the chief administrative judge? These are all things that, right now in the last 2 years has heightened. You can't find, you're on a waiting list with DEI or JEDI, as I like to call it, Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion consultants who are looked for in what is faster than they can book or have time to be booked on training, because there is a sensitivity to this issue. There's a fantastic project called the Discovery Justice Project, and they've been working collaboratively. Former judges, former NYPD, community leaders, faith leaders coming together to really dissect what is and where is it that bail reform needed to take place, and what has changed and what needs to be taken into consideration. It's projects like those that are really doing a yeoman's job in making sure that the conversation changes, that it's not isolating, that it's bringing people together so that we understand as leaders where we got it wrong, right? the opportunities to be able to look at the affordability of our state, right? So when we talk about, we have 300,000 people that have left New York just last year alone. Since 1957, we had 45 congressional districts. Today, we have 27 congressional districts, and we're going to be losing one more. We're down to 26. And when we lose a congressional representative, that equals to a loss of funding, federal funding. The equation doesn't match up. If we're losing individuals every year, every decade, and our budget is ballooning, today it's 220 billion people with less people to contribute, we're leaving this state in ruins for our children.
Well, Diana, I want to go back to something because you hit on something that I was going to ask regarding bail reform. So it's definitely a hot button issue amongst Democrats. We're a Democratic club. So I'll hear from different folks. We have a lot of Democrats who did not agree with bail reform and some of the justice reform measures that were passed through the budget. We have many other Democrats, who feel extremely passionate about that. We're going to hear from some of those folks in our second meeting in the month later on in the month, and I'm looking forward to that because I think it's a great opportunity to get folks who have different opinions about that to express and educate why they feel a certain way, to bring the facts. But I just want to throw a couple of things at you. So the Brennan Center for Justice puts out data and looks at data regarding, regarding bail reform and regarding crime. And, what they present is, not seeing a connection necessarily between bail reform laws and crime rates. So, their contention and many others will contend that recidivism rates have not increased, even though it's not a perfect system. However, on the other hand, how do you tell somebody whose family or themselves, if they are victimized by somebody who was out on bail, or if they read a story about that, how do you convey that to them, right? There's always cracks there. And, there might be disputes in the data. Again, I'm presenting what I've always read, things that I've believed to be true. But, you go through what happened the other day. And again, that has nothing to do with bail, the shooting on the subway, but the general sense that, in Brooklyn and I work downtown Manhattan. So as a commuter, that's a fear of mine. You get on a train, what if there's a shooting? Going back to the Colin Ferguson shooting, that's always this fear. It gets to the heart of, it's so easy for anytime there's any kind of crime, you'll read stories where the New York Post just goes wild. Any crime that happens, whether it has to do with bail or not, they'll say, and this is what happens when you do bail reform. So they sensationalize it.
Right.
It's tough to have these conversations because it creates a circus-like environment that benefits the Republicans. But I still believe in, the power to have a conversation about this. So I wanted to ask you, and you already, alluded to a few points, but how do we, there's this balance of how much do we pay as a society to keep people in prison who haven't been sentenced? And how committed can we be to justice reform without endangering public safety? To what extent?
Right.
Where is that line? So getting away from the politics of the issue and just getting right down to it, what aspects of justice reform, whether it's bail reform or other, elder parole or what have you, what do you support? Where do you think the system where these, reform laws could really benefit? Where have they been a benefit? But where do you think the change is? Like, where's bail reform gone wrong, in your opinion?
Right. So
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So then I just want to share, there's a difference between high-level crimes and low-level crimes, right? High-level crimes in bail reform in 2019 left out what was rape, right? The opportunities to be able to bring back rape, right? Because if you do it once, what's the likelihood that you'll do it again, right? That person being let out is a threat to society, right? Especially what would be women, right? Higher propensity. You have children, higher propensity. So we need to really nail down where the problem lies as far as what categories really low offense versus high offense. You have 20% of the individuals that commit a crime that are out there that are likely to be in a situation where they're going to be there's going to be a recidivism attempt. And that's not to say that all 20% are, but that the likelihood is, right? And so where there's a firearm involved, right? Tom and I have spoken about what is creating a tri-state commission to deal with the illegal gun highway that comes in and out between our three states, right? The opportunities to be able to engage with law enforcement, high-level statewide officials to come together, bring in the federal government, be able to have a discussion. How do we address getting guns off the illegal guns off the streets?
Yeah.
These are not issues that are going to be dealt with overnight, and it's certainly not necessarily bail reform to blame for all of it. But we know that there is an uptick in crime. In St. Louis, they're studying what is the lowest crime, despite a pandemic, that has occurred in the history of St. Louis. And it's not necessarily one action. They realize, though, that there's a glaring point that the study continues to see as far as a common ground. And it's when community and law enforcement have been increasing conversations, right? Who's the best source for attacking what is crime? It's community working with law enforcement. Community knows when something's about to happen or who did it. They're your neighbor. They're the person you least thought would get themselves in trouble. The social media has become the tool to be able to detect who's going to be in a fight. Just 2 blocks away from my home, the police came running around, knocking on doors. I wasn't home, just to ask if anybody saw something, because a man was taken to the hospital because he was beaten up so bad, he was almost fatal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so what do we do with things like this?
Well, and to the point about community and making sure that people feel vested in whatever reforms are going on and just the process in general, I think the biggest critique that I personally have, and I've heard this from other Democrats as well, is how, I'm not a fan of making laws to the budget, because to me it cuts out, and this is something that's been going on in New York State for a long time. Hochul didn't start that. Cuomo didn't start that process. This goes back to the concept of the governor, the executive having so much power in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that it came back to bite us a little bit, in that we didn't have, we're pushing out bail reform laws, have commercials about it, have information out there about it, so that we, you could build public support. Because public support, actually, in this polling that shows us, I believe Siena polling that showed support for bail reform laws, like when people were just asked about it before everything hit the media, against bail reform was pretty high. But then as the opposition started to message it against it, that support dropped. And a lot of this on both sides is based on not engaging the community about what changes you want to make. And I think even bail reform supporters would agree with that, there wasn't this process of let's educate folks on what's trying to happen. Let's have that back and forth and come up with something. It was just, this is going in the budget and now it's a reality. I don't feel that that's a good way of making policy. What's your thought on that? Oh, well, let me, I don't know why you were muted there. You can unmute now. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So having public discourse delays everything, right? Mm. So it's easier to tie a change of a law with the budget,
right?
When you don't want participation. There needed to be conversation. That's part of the problem, that we don't have conversation, right? And so we're not encouraging what is, whether you agree or not. Let's first start on educating the public.
Yeah.
And when you start educating the public, then you're giving choice to the public.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we're at 8 o'clock. I want to give folks a chance. I know you have to get out by 8:30 for a commitment. So we'll get you out before then. But the last thing I wanted to get to, I wanted to bring up school boards and education, because it's such a hot topic of cultural grievance has kind of, engulfed discussion around schools and school boards. It's happening at the local levels. So I want to get your opinion on education in general, but I have to ask this because so many people reached out, and I wanted to ask it when I saw this, but there was a quote from, I want to preface by saying you're Tom Suozzi's running mate, but it's not, for folks who don't know, it's not like president and vice president. You're your own candidate. He's his own candidate, but it's, I guess you could call it an alliance, right? It's people running on a common slate, some common ideas. So I thought it was only fair to get, your comments on this, but I want to be fair and just read, what city and state put out on, Tom Suozzi, who was running for governor in the primary against Kathy Hochul and Jumaane Williams. He was on the Bernie and Sid WABC show, which is it's a morning show. It's more of a right wing. I mean, they talk sports too. They come from the sports world. I remember them from WFAN. But they, they get into politics, and they're definitely more conservative show. So they had asked Tom Suozzi, and I quote from Sid Rosenberg, "I want to ask you about this Florida law, the Parental Rights Act, which prohibits teachers from talking sex, genitals, stuff like that with kids kindergarten to third grade." And he's referencing the bill's formal name. It's also known as the Don't Say Gay bill, commonly, in media. So the response from Tom Suozzi was, quote, "I think it's a very reasonable law not to try to get kids in kindergarten to be talking about sex. I wish it wouldn't become such a hot button issue where people are just attacking each other. It's just common sense." So, he followed that up. He said he's not anti-gay. I'm very much in favor of equal rights. I'm very much in favor of treating gay people fairly and treating them like human beings they are. Without directly addressing the controversy surrounding the Florida law. And there was some other banter about that. I'm not going to read the whole article. I will mention, though, as written, the law does not explicitly prohibit discussion of genitals nor being gay. However, and this is the quote from the bill itself. This is the Florida bill now. "Classroom instruction by school personnel on third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards." So before I get your response to that, I just wanted to, and I want to give people, I'm not going to editorialize too much on this. I want to give people, I'm sure in the Q&A, chance to kind of let their emotions out. I want you to be able to express your emotion on this without kind of me clouding everything. But I will say, I know that the concern from many parents, some of my best friends, by the way, are gay parents. In our district, we have a lot of great same-sex couples, people who identify in all different ways when it comes to gender, who are great parents. And the concern is with how that bill is worded, that it could very much be interpreted that if there's any kind of discussion, even on, maybe it's a Valentine's Day thing, and they're just simply talking about non-hetero relationships. Can a kid even express in class that, they have parents who are gay or same sex or, non-gender conforming, or what, again, however, whatever the situation is. Is it sending a message that, it's not okay to have non-hetero parents? And that it's absolutely frightening. And a lot of how the Republicans are pushing this, they're pushing it in the way that they're almost saying, well, teachers who bring this stuff up are predators. And that's just, it boggles my mind. So when I see that, and when I see a candidate who's a Democrat say, use the term reasonable when it comes to this, I don't know whether he was thinking it through, whatever it may be, it really pisses me off. It really pissed a lot of other people off. I'm just going to say that right there. I'm not going to go into everything I think about that.
Sure.
But I want to give you the room to respond, because again, you're your own candidate. I don't think it's fair to assume that you think one way or the other about it. I want to give you when you saw that, how did you feel, and what is your response to that? What is your opinion on the Don't Say Gay bill?
When Tom was on that interview, and I listened to it, I listened to the recording. Both my husband and I listened to the recording because we've been following what is this issue. I don't necessarily remember that I ever had what would be during my childhood at that age, what is any discussion of, what is, the biological framework of any gender as far as education was concerned, right? You're barely reading, you're barely learning math. And just with our kids alone, right? Like they're teenagers now, and when we even bring up any type of discussion, they're like, "Ooh, stop, mom!" Right? My kids have friends that are gay, that are transgender, and this generation, for them, it's normal, right? It's society, right? And one thing's for sure, given the religious holidays this week, love is love. That's what we have to start understanding. Now, having said that, right, the interview was much fuller than what was necessarily tweeted, in all fairness. Tom started with and ended with, "I fully support the LGBTQ community, their families, and their equal rights." So we have to make sure that we're not running with what is a tagline that was just taken out of convenience. That's how we start distracting ourselves from the core issues. Now, I know whether you're from the LGBTQ community or the heterosexual community or any community, we as parents, you get in the way of my child and it's over, right? We protect our children, right? No matter who or what community you belong to. And I think there's a common ground here that we all have to share so that we're able to embrace and protect them all. That's more important to me than taking rhetoric and twisting it so that it becomes a sensational tweet.
Right. I think the issue that Tom runs, and this is just my opinion, but I think the issue he gets in here is that, he starts off by saying "I support," ends by saying "I support," but in the middle is using that tagline. And again, it seemed like he was just kind of throwing some boilerplate language. Again, he uses that tagline a lot about, common sense. He's used that when it comes to bail reform. I get it. You're running for office, you have a tagline, you use it. I just think it's like, you can't on the one hand say "I support," and then on the other hand say, yeah, there's reasonable aspects to that bill, because there's a lot of families that say there is no middle ground on this. That is not a reasonable bill. We're frightened. This is for our lives now. Why could my kid not express the love that they have for, the love that I have for my, same-sex, husband, wife, etc. Why is this even an issue? And it feels like it's only an issue because Republicans and these far-right groups are injecting this cultural grievance politics into our school boards, when we should be talking about, are we funding special education? How, let's get back, you talk about common sense. And I think this is, and again, I'll get your view on this. Tom might be better served saying, look, I'm a common sense guy. Let's get back to talking about getting more money in the schools, building better schools, get back to that instead of this. Oh my God, they're talking about, like, I have to be honest, I have two children, one who's 7, one who's in nursery school entering pre-K. My 7-year-old, he's never come home and said, oh my God, we talked about genitals in school. Oh my God, we talked about this. Never have I heard about that. But, if he has a classmate who, maybe they just have a discussion on, there's parents who are same sex. They love their kids as much as, your parents who are hetero. I don't see anything wrong with it. That's just my opinion. I mean, again, do you feel that he could have expressed himself better on that, or maybe not fallen into they were leading him towards that. I get what they were trying to do, but do you think that it could have just been better stated, or what?
I think that he expressed what was support for the LGBT community, as he always has, and the opportunity to express what is the plain language of common sense was taken out of context, right? The word reasonable, he was probably talking about his own experience as a father, and sex education not being something that he wanted his children at that period in their life to be taught by anyone other than him and his wife, right?
And let's put this out there. It's almost unfair that you obviously you're only answering this because you, again, are allied with him. But I don't think women should have to be explaining. Like, Tom's a big boy; he can explain it himself. That's I part of me believes that. I don't think it's totally fair.
Lisa is agreeing with you.
Here, being Tom Swazi's interpreter, if he wants to come on and talk about that, I'm sure he's going to be talking about that.
That sounds like a plan.
Absolutely. So it's,
And William, I do have to say,
yeah,
speaking of education, right? Because this is the problem we have. Education right now needs to be inspected, right? Like chopped up,
right.
because we're losing our kids. I have children that have lost 2 years of their education. 2 years. That is unacceptable. And we're doing nothing to help them gain traction, gain the lost time, add more hours to the curriculum, add more hours on the weekends, open the school building up. None of that discussion has taken place.
Yeah.
And so in the meantime, what we have is an inequity, children falling behind. There's going to be high school dropouts, middle school dropouts, because that's what happens when you start feeling shameful that you're not keeping up with the rest of the kids who have access to resources of private tutoring, scholarships, acceptance to college, and you start, and God only knows a child with special education needs. I have a child with special education needs.
Yeah.
And it's important that as parents, we are fighting what is equal access to education. You cannot tell me that a child in a good school in one's district and another child in the same district going to a poor performing school have equal ground.
Not at all. And I'm so glad you said that, because I feel that's where the discussion needs to be on education. What you
Absolutely
said is exactly, and I was on a school board briefly in the Middle Country School Board here locally. You hear about that issue more than anything. I feel like that's what parents want to talk about. And I'm with you 100%. And especially for kids in the city, because I believe the schools are shut down a little bit longer in the city.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to a lot of the kids in those districts that, to me, are not getting their fair share, their fair shake. A lot of our Long Island districts not getting their fair share from Albany as well. So
and ironically, I just want, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure. Ironically, my child, the youngest, who's 14, graduated the same school as my eldest, went to Catholic school, and Catholic school never shut down.
Right, exactly. Unfair advantage against the
wealthy. Never shut down. So we have to question our leaders in government. And why was that the case with schools with students in public schools? Another point is, we have a New York State lottery system that was created with the notion that we would have all that money invested in education. Where is all that money?
Yeah.
We have to start following the money. And all these consultants, a third of our budget in the city of New York goes towards education, $21,000 per child. I was speaking to a young teacher, physics major and minor in education, went to teach at a charter school high school, which was supposed to be the alternative for parents. And she was explaining she had to leave teaching because she was scared. A child bit her 2 different times. The same student bit her. And in the same classroom, they tried to set the classroom on fire. Oh. What we need is mental health services in these schools, in all our schools.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, there's so many local school board candidates here talking about that, who, again, they're not talking about the cultural grievance stuff. They're talking about that issue that you just said, all the things that you just brought up. To me, that's the education platform right there. Yep. I want to move, because I know that we only have a little bit of time. We have about 15 minutes before you have to go. So let's open it up to questions. If you're cool with that, let's get a couple of questions out there. I know Lisa Lacourte, you had privately said that you had a question, so I'm going to start with you just to warm everything up. Please make the questions brief, everyone. Let's be respectful, and go ahead, Lisa. You can unmute.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't prepared, but all right.
Hey, you asked me 10 minutes ago. I thought you had it written down.
First, I have to say, Deanna, is that I think that you are a dynamic candidate. I'm really, the first time I saw you speak, I was very impressed. You do not have to make excuses or stick up for or cover for Tom Swazi, he's a grown man. He can handle that. You carry yourself just as you do. You do a fantastic job. I'm very impressed with you.
Thank you.
I think that Will had asked my question regarding his statement, because that is a topic that's happening a lot out here regarding the LGBTQ community.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I think that I like the way you responded, but like I said, you are not responsible for Tom Swazi. You do not need him. You know, we can choose someone other than Tom Swazi, but I really think that you are dynamic, and I'm from South 2nd Street, girl, so I know the neighborhood.
Here you
You
go.
never leave home.
All right, Lisa, you didn't have any other question? Okay, I see you muted yourself there. Bob Ober, you can unmute yourself. Bob, what's your question?
Well, we have 50,000 homeless plus in the city of New York. At any time during the school year with 1,000 students in New York, at some point, 50,000 of them are homeless. We have 3,000 homeless in Suffolk County. Now, as a lieutenant governor, what can you do to help solve that problem to some degree?
Thank you, Bob.
So Bob, I appreciate that you asked that, because that's our most vulnerable. When I was in the city council my last year, I went to have a conversation with the independent budget office. They conduct what would be studies, and you have to commission those studies, right? So I asked the question, how, because I was seeing a trend in our district as far as families being displaced and children were traveling further. And no one was tracking where these kids were coming from because their address remained the same. So I went to the IBO office and I asked them, I need you to tell me, do you have a report on tracking homeless children? And they said, no, Diana, council member, we should do that. And that led to what would be the 2014 report that was published to demonstrate what is a lack of tracking, what is children that are homeless, that then laser focused on schools that had a higher propensity to be providing with no resources, what would be teaching homeless kids that no teacher, no principal, no guidance counselor ever knew, right? Because it wasn't public. It wasn't spoken about. It wasn't triaged in the education system. There was one school in particular. They had to use their resources to buy a washing machine for the school because kids were coming to school with dirty laundry and they had nowhere to clean it. So the school took it upon themselves and built a support group of volunteers that would wash the kids' clothes while they were in class and leave home with a bag of clean clothes for the week. That is New York City. That is New York State. That is shameful. And the school did it illegally. What the Department of Education concentrated on was the fact that the washing machine was illegal, as opposed to addressing the actual issue. 50% of the school's children were homeless.
I'm glad you asked that, Bob, because I wanted to get to that topic during our main program. I left some room for folks during the Q&A. So glad that homelessness came up. And Diana, I think that's a perfect response, especially among our children, among our teenagers, our most vulnerable. Absolutely. Mr. Rodriguez.
William, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure Bob understood. We have to be in a position of knowing where the problems are. If we're not all knowing, we can't fix anything. And just claiming that it exists is not enough. We have to know where it exists, how it's impacting people, where it's impacting people, and finding solutions together with community. That school found a way to be able to address an issue that was immediate to those children. And the system was telling them, you shouldn't be doing this.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Jana Rodriguez, could we get your question?
Yes. So Hello, Diane. It's such a pleasure
Hi.
to finally put a face to a name. So I am a childcare provider on Long Island. And my question to you is, as Lieutenant Governor, what is your take on the executive budget that came out regarding the money that is being allocated towards childcare, what they're claiming to be $7 billion when we know that it is far, far less than the $7 billion? And what is your take on, if you do become Lieutenant Governor, on making sure that childcare is accessible to all families, especially the middle class families who are being affected because they can't afford to pay for childcare, nor do they qualify for subsidy. And so I just want to ask you that question, and so it's a twofold question, right?
Mhm.
What do you think about the executive budget and the money that was allocated and this big $7 billion in every single newspaper that you could literally read when it's absolutely an incorrect narrative? And as Lieutenant Governor, you're a mother. So what do you think? What are you going to do in regards to making sure that childcare is accessible?
So I fought and advocated for childcare in my district and throughout the city for a very long time from day one, right? I understood it because when I was 12 years old, I volunteered at my first job. It was volunteering at our local daycare center. And that daycare center was the first built the year I was born. I wasn't fortunate enough to attend that daycare center, but my friends all grew up in the daycare center. The director and founder lived up the block from me. The opportunity to be able to see and value what were daycare centers, and they were educational daycare centers, right? Like we miss the value of it when we take away education from it. And so there's a distinction. From there, we built what would be informal caring of children in people's homes to a formalized home care providers, right? Building their own group home centers, training what would be housewives or second career mothers who wanted to continue working from home, what would be the appropriate setting for an educational environment. The $7 billion is a great way to just throw a number, right? And tracking those numbers is more important. Our budget is not transparent, and it's meant not to be transparent. So the opportunity to be able to use, we're in an age of technology. What do we have to hide? This is an opportunity for us to embrace what is technology in government, being able to not just PDF outcomes of our money, but being able to manage what is looking for data and tracking where those dollars are by giving access to the public. This money that was allocated for childcare services could not have been $7 billion, because if it is, it's missing the component of what are the family courts being given the opportunity to receive funds for child care services when families are in family court, in dispute, and they have not been covered. And so there is a shortage.
Thank you so much for the question. We're just about out of time. You know what? I'll ask the last question, something I was wondering earlier, Diana. Let's say you win, you become the next lieutenant governor, but Kathy Hochul wins office and retains office. How would you approach a situation like that? What would be your mentality? Would you be able to work, with her, and how would you go about fomenting the changes that you want to see in kind of that split atmosphere that you weren't necessarily running together? How would you approach that?
Women in politics always discuss this, right? Men can have a fight, public, hash it out, and by the evening hours, they're having a drink together.
Absolutely.
That will be my approach.
There, you know what? I don't think there's a better way to end this than on that note. I think that's a perfect answer. Thank you so much, Diana. I think you were absolutely dynamic. You did a great job tonight, in my opinion. Really gave us a lot to think about, and I think that you bring an energy to this race that's very, very much needed. I hope everybody checks out your website, your social media presence, and continues to learn more about you as a candidate. And I hope that we hear from you again.
And William, I hope you can reconsider running for office, because it's really great to see what you've founded here with your colleagues. It's important that we as people remember government is made of people, by people, for people. So that is not a cliche. We live by that every day. And what you're doing here is government.
Listen, move me into one of the city districts that has all the Democrats. Then I'll do it. Then we got a deal. Thank you so much, Diana. It was an absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And I look forward to coming back in person.
And we'll do that for sure. All
Sounds
right.
good.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming out on Good Friday, on Passover, and
Yes.
joining us. Thank you.
Happy
So much.
Easter.
Yes,
Thank
happy
you.
Easter, everyone.